Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 168. My guest in this episode is Dr. Aaron Poochigian, and I have him on to speak to his most recent book that he's published, which is a translation of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. And in this discussion, in this dialogue, we unpack some of what Aaron was able to bring to that translation process and what Aaron was able to revive, perhaps, or restore in Aurelius's work. And so that fascinated me in my research and as well reading this translation. Aaron is also an accomplished poet, writer. He has modern literature that he has published. He's also done other translation work. So just a fascinating person, and I really enjoyed meeting him and having this conversation and becoming a little more enlightened about, I guess, later Stoicism, and because I had no clue. So it was good to read the Meditations and get a little bit of a grip on that. So thank you so much for being here, and please enjoy this conversation. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Aaron Poochigian to the IdeaCast interview series. I will, before I speak to you directly, Aaron, I will also welcome to the YouTube and Spotify audience, and I will confess to Aaron and the YouTube audience that I really didn't know much about Marcus Aurelius, save for a Hannibal Lecter quote. So it was a very enlightening experience for me to, and I couldn't even quote that quote, but to learn more about Marcus's work, specifically Meditations. So I'll let the cat out of the bag. That's why we're here. We're here to talk about a new book published in the beginning of 2026 from Aaron. And we are going to learn about the book. We're going to learn about Aaron's background and a lot more, I'm sure. So to you, Aaron, welcome. Glad to have you here, sir.
Thank you for having me, Justin.
Yeah, no, I do. You know, I like, so Spa, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the pre-Socratics, but I am, you know, once we get past like post-axial age, I'm clueless. Like the Common Era, before Common Era, that whole thing is just wide open. So again, to get into the first century Common Era and listen to you bringing Marcus Aurelius alive, and we're going to talk about the dimensionality that you bring and your updating or your iteration of it. So. But first, if you don't mind, let's find out a little about you and whatever you're feeling is relevant or contextually appropriate for where we're going to go in this conversation.
Yeah, I ended up translating Marcus Aurelius' Meditations because of something that happened to me when I was 18. I had a kind of religious experience. I was reading this humanities textbook out front of the English building, Weld Hall. It was the opening of the Aeneid, an epic in Latin. And I didn't know Latin, but the sky became brighter and the grass became greener. I was like, oh, and I knew I was supposed to be a poet. And I also knew that I was supposed to learn ancient Greek and Latin. And that's pretty much what I've done. I mean, I went to graduate school, and yes, I'm a professor of classics. But my primary motivation was always to be a poet and to steal things from ancient Greek and Latin authors so that I could use them in my own poetry. So I started out doing a lot of translation young, and I was lucky in that those first translations, were published and well received. And so translation kind of became its half craft exercise for me. I do it because I love the voices and I love the techniques, the patterning of the words, and I want to bring that over to my own work. But yes, it's also become kind of a career for me as well, in that I'm usually working on a new translation. I had only ever, though, done poetry, translated poetry, up until Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
Okay.
And that's the first prose work I translated. And the reason was I was coming out of COVID. I had a difficult time during COVID, like most people. And I was looking for methods of meditation. And there were a couple that I liked. And suddenly when I started rereading the Meditations in Greek, I knew I needed to make my own translation. For a number of reasons we can talk about later. But part of it was just, that I wanted to go through the process that Marcus puts himself through every day. And so, yes, it was a very healthy for me process translating the Meditations.
Yeah, and I do want to unpack how you did it and how you stand out, or how there is variance in your treatment versus historically. But one thing, as a tangent, as a sidebar, when you talked about this moment that you had, this almost like spiritual opening, there's some cogsci people that I love, and they're talking about these kind of, they would probably broadly, or maybe doing violences, like call it a flow state, but it's like this salience, aperture opening, this connectivity, all these things. When I've heard you describe it in other interviews before, that moment, and it just makes me think of like them describing what is a true flow state, like a jazz musician, improv, boing, and then all of a sudden there's this space that opens up that's not your space, that it's the space of whatever's going on. So I just wanted to throw that in there because I heard you mention that in another interview when I was researching you, and I love it because those are really powerful moments in our lives, and how great that it brought you to where we are right now, and talking about meditations and how you came to it as a poet. I also thought that was interesting, that you had that lens, that perspectival knowing of cadence and some of the rhythm signatures, and how people outside of a very academic, dry approach to things, I think having that poetic fire or light in you lends itself, right?
Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah. And yes, I mean, when I decided to do my own translation, I don't want to trash other people's translations, but no. The previous translations for me fell into two groups. There were the formalizers or the classicizers who made it cold and marmoreal and classical, like the Parthenon, like a marble temple. Mm-hmm. Whereas in fact, we know from history, temples were painted bright colors. And I thought, yes, that's what I wanted to bring to Marcus Aurelius' Meditations that wasn't there before. And also because I felt the formal tone isn't appropriate. Marcus uses slang terms for semen and feces, mm-hmm. and he, quotes old comedy. And so he's talking to himself. There's no reason for him to be formal.
Right.
Yes, in a rhetoric. Yeah. And then the other group of translations were the simplifiers, and those have been very popular. But when Marcus gives you a long, elegant sentence, those translations will chop it up. And then like the texture, and as you were saying, the rhythm is different. Mm-hmm. It's highly balanced. There's this on this side and that on that side often. And I tried as much as possible to keep the original syntactic and rhetorical emphasis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no. And there's something that I'll open up, or I'll open the door and let you work with it. But one thing that I wasn't necessarily picking up on it in reading it. This is me. But in, again, researching you and listening to you speak with other people, is you talk about this triadic system or a trialogic system where there are aspects, let's say, of Marcus, character, dissociative alters of Aurelius, which I love. I love triadic systems to begin with, and then I love trialogic, like three people talking, and the tension that can be built and the tonos and all of that. So again, I wasn't hip enough to catch it in reading it necessarily, other than catching some obvious things. But yeah, so that you did that vis-a-vis maybe a flat kind of ontology in the other ones, and ontology as in beings, characters. So yeah, please share that.
Oh,
that's really important.
The revelation I had, another revelation I had when I was working on the meditations early, I was looking at it as a poet, and I wanted to figure out how to make the translation as dynamic and exciting, mm-hmm. As I was finding the original. And what happens, I came across the idea, I felt, as I was translating, I'd never felt this before, that I was Marcus's shrink, because it's so personal and intimate. I felt like I was his therapist, sitting there listening to him talk every day. And that led me to think of a psychological school called psychodrama.
Okay.
Yes, in which it's founded in the 1920s. There's an institute for it, I believe, in Sweden. But yes, what you do is that patients act out situations in their lives, or more importantly for me, act out aspects of their personality. And they make progress through that dynamic theatrical interplay. Yeah. And so I came to realize, especially when I was switching from that first book, which is the dedicatory book, when Marcus gives thanks to everybody, that's all in the I voice. And I'll talk about that in a second. But most of what you encounter early on, it takes a little bit for the voices to creep in. Mostly what you encounter early on is the dominant voice, who's the instructor. Mm-hmm. And he speaks to a you. And that you is Marcus the aspirant, who speaks with I in some situations. The instructor doesn't speak with I, the aspirant does. And what fascinated me also, I realized, is that you, the instructor that's Marcus Aurelius addressing himself. But we readers can't help but take that you as referring to ourselves. Hmm. And so it's a slippery you, right? Marcus is talking to himself, but as we're reading it, it just hits us right here, right? It's sort of that you invites us in and takes us on the journey of self-improvement. Right. Good. So that's the dominant voice that uses the you. And then there's the voice of the aspirant who speaks with an I. And I love having the aspirant's contributions in the meditations because he's vulnerable. The instructor is invulnerable, impenetrable, but the aspirant talks about his anger issues. He's frequently indignant towards other people. In one entry, Marcus even says he's slow-witted. He has to train himself out of being slow-witted, excuse me. Yes, I love that voice because it humanizes the work for me. It's not just a bunch of brash commands coming at you, but this interplay between the you and the I, the monologues they give, and the tone is so different. And then the third character is almost comic. He's called the objector, and he is just a whiny, contentious voice. He's a straw man or a foil. He exists so that the instructor can tell him he's wrong. So his contributions are fun. He's whiny often, like, this road has thistles on it. And then the instructor says, try to avoid them. Like, duh.
Yeah.
Like, duh.
But that's important, right? I mean, you have to have that kind of tension there again, the dichotomy.
Yeah. And I think that you talk about the dynamic triadic structure is good because the whole work is a process. Like, we're working towards something. Marcus has a goal, which is of becoming the perfected Stoic, right? Who only does acts of justice, only focuses on the present moment, and the byproduct of all that just action is happiness, right? Some days in his entries, Marcus will say, I did it. Like, I was able to sustain, right, doing just actions, living in accordance with nature, as he says, the great Stoic goal for a period of time. And then in other entries, he's like, oh yeah, he has had a bad day, and he lashes into himself. You deserve what you are suffering. And so, yes, I see it as dynamic, and that the process is working towards a goal, and it's a state of perfection that may be hard to sustain, right? Another analogy I try to use for the training that Marcus is putting himself through is yoga. And that there are fixed poses, and you try to get them as you get better and better at yoga, just right, exactly right. They're hard to get perfect. And Marcus, in the same way as you repeat poses in yoga, Marcus repeats themes in meditations. Okay. But he doesn't, it's not repetitive in the pejorative sense. It's more like theme and variation. He'll bring things, and so he'll combine his ideas in different contexts, trying to get it right, and then become, a perfected Stoic.
Yeah. Well, in the West, I mean, you're talking about meditations and poses. That goes more like about Advaita Vedanta and Vedic systems and yoga. But in the West, and we were certainly imbued through various channels into the Western canon. But I think the idea of prose, of the structure of the semantics and the semiotics that come with the semantics, these ideas of meditating on words and phrases or poetry or didacts or whatever, carries a tremendous weight for us in the West. I think that is what we've inherited. Again, even though with some coming around obliquely from the East, but I like words and prose and the written meditations, as we're speaking to here, as meditation. period, like that one can enter in. So ritual, dialectic, and disruption are my triadic system for change, for, whatever it is, movement forward, transcendence, whatever you want to call it. So dialectic, ritual, I think, speaks to that, in what you're saying. So kind of a tangent, but yeah, I'm agreeing 100%. I think that's a powerful meditation tool. Now, one thing I want to ask with regard to what influences do you think, now Marcus was first century Common Era. Obviously there's a lineage there. He was using Greek in your translation. You brought it to Greek, but he wrote formally in Greek, right? I mean, this was sort of, so in other words, like in Europe, you didn't write in German, you wrote in Latin, and so that would be, Latin would be to Greek what German is to Latin, and so he was writing in a more formal structure, which I guess to get to a question, it's been said, and I think by you and other conversations, that he wrote for himself in this, but in everything you just said about these three persona, or however you say that plurally, do you think he was imagining this being something that would be for the consumption, not of the vulgar, prosaic, but maybe for people at his intellectual level? Do you think he was imagining this as being distributed somehow to a certain tier?
The scholarly consensus is that Marcus didn't intend for it to be published, that it was a private philosophical diary. Okay. And I have come around to believing that view for reasons I've already mentioned. Like we have imperial autobiography, like we have the res gestae, the accomplished works of the deified Emperor Augustus, the first emperor, right? And it's whitewashed and propagandistic, and he writes in the first person, right? And that's imperial autobiography that's meant for the public, right? Whereas, Marcus, as I said, uses slang terms, and even though he's the emperor and the most powerful person in the world at the time he's writing, right? He reveals all these weaknesses that he has. I can't imagine anything like that ever being intended, for the public. Marcus would not have been so candid as he is if he had intended to be published. And so, yes, some sections, some entries, I call them entries, like dialogue entries, are au naturel. Like he's clearly just jotting things down. It's a list. And it's cool because you get to see his mind working, right, as he's writing. And then there are other ones, that he does what I do when I journal, right? I have a journal, but I'm a writer and I'm obsessed. So I'll go back and fiddle with it and try to make it better. And so there are some entries, yes, which he spends more time on. But another reason for the formal rhetoric that he uses in those is that it makes them more memorable. And he's trying not to be dependent on books. Early in book 2 of the 12 books of meditations, he says, not even your books are allowed here, right? He says, if you don't get over, and he compares it to drunkenness, like alcoholism. If you don't get over your drunken dependence on books, you will die muttering written words, right, as you're reading to yourself, rather than basking in the glory of things and heartily thanking the gods. And so he's down on, books as well. And so I guess I'm with the scholarly consensus in that, meditations wasn't meant to be shown to anyone seen by anyone other than Marcus.
Wow. So that I would then infer or just guess that this was, as you said, it was whatever the species of psychodrama was for him back then, right? That, this was his therapy. This was his decompression and his what do the young people say now, like a mind dump or something like that. Yes. And he had a mind, right? So he's putting this all on paper, which, to think about it as we move, through history into where we are in the whatever stage of modernity we're in right now, that someone could have that kind of cathartic, depressurization, and as you said, journaling. We all journal in one form, even if it's just thinking about your day without putting it on paper, but that you're introspecting. Yeah, that's powerful. That he was that. Maybe it was his neurosis. Like that he would get all of these really powerful thoughts put down just for this, enclosed, ensconced environment of his own. How often did he revisit this? How often did he imbibe in his own work? And that's why I was wondering, I'm like, was, again, not that he actually did intend for it, but that in his mind, in the imagineering of, what have I wrought and how am I, the artificer of these ideas, how am I getting this out? It just seems like that the thoughtfulness and the intensity of what he talks about for his own, journaling or his own consumption. It's interesting.
Yes. You were talking about, the mental catharsis. I see the meditations as working it's psychology in that Marcus is, certainly working towards a healthier state of mind, the ideal state of mind. It's philosophical in that he brings in cosmology, like how the universe is built, and other philosophical issues relating like Socrates and such. But it's also religious. It's all three of those things at the same time: psychological, philosophical, and religious. Mm-hmm. And Marcus is a true believer. At times when the instructor is talking, he sounds like a fire and brimstone preacher, right? Mm-hmm. He's breathing fire. And that came to really endear me. As I said in the introduction, I say he's relentlessly earnest. Like he really means everything all the time. And it took it after a while that came to endear him to me, right? That he's just so fervent, right? I get excited about what I do, but he's all in all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you, a little light bulb went off when you were saying that, and going back to the wall of privacy versus the public writings that were distributed to the masses. Do some of these meditations or vignettes show up in the public writings? Do they show up elsewhere, or variations on the theme of some of the more salient points that he's addressed in his meditations?
Oh, you mean? I'm sorry. Did entries get out into the world from meditations?
Well, not like a direct, copy paste, to use modern language. No. Just like if he was issuing something to the prosaic, to the public, were there analogous an analogous distribution of the ideas, thoughts, words, whatever, that were in the meditations that then made it out into public, but not intending to be, this is a verse, 31 book 4, 31. No. It was just, did it just show up elsewhere, subtly, as
during Marcus's time, certainly Stoicism was prevalent. It was one of the more popular Roman religions. But the textual history of how we even end up with this meditations and its huge impact in the West, it's its own story. I can only speculate, but the assumption is someone, perhaps Marcus's Greek language scribe, chose to preserve this meditations, and we know that's going to start around 180 AD, right? And then we go for the next 100 years and we hear nothing about it, right? And then in the 7th century AD, we get Arathos of Caesarea, who mentions having it, and he recommends it, and he says he's going to have a copy made for his friend, and he gives us the first title for it. He refers to it as Things Written to Oneself. The name Meditations only showed up later in the 18th century for the first English translation of the work. And then subsequently, we have very scanty evidence for it. There's this huge encyclopedia of Greek culture that we get called the Suda, that comes right around 1000 AD. And it's important. It mentions it has meditations. It knows about meditations. And he also mentions that it's broken up into 12 books. And that's an interesting issue, right? because in what state did Marcus leave the manuscript, right? He didn't divide it up into entries and into 12 books. The assumption is those are later accretions. That first book may have been moved to the front because it worked so well as an extended dedication. In the first book, Marcus gives thanks to exemplary people in his life. And then the later books, the instructor and the characters start speaking. Yes, that first book is in the voice of the aspirant, the I.
Okay.
Good. And so subsequently, manuscripts were translated and ended up in monasteries throughout Europe. And now we have one almost complete manuscript in the Vatican archives, and then 5 others in monasteries. And there was one text, this is a sad story, the first German translator translated it from Greek to Latin. Xylander was his name. And subsequently, the Greek text he copied from was lost. And so we have independent corroboration for the rest of the meditation from his Latin translation, which is quite good.
Okay.
And then it's gone on to be a super phenomenon, translated, yes, many times in English over recent years.
Okay. Yeah, with the rise in popularity of Stoicism, which we could talk about in a little bit. Now, given the sort of the genealogy of handlers and so forth in academia, in people who take this very seriously, is there argumentation about any apocryphal, whatever, is how do the academics and the scholars like yourself view that lineage? Do they think that there's a pretty, as you said, as you just got done saying, there were some things that happened that may have had some wobble effect to it. But so anyway, is it controversial in any way that this what we're reading today may have been embellished or interpreted in odd ways or had spurious authors historically?
Oh, got it. Got it. No, we're very confident.
Okay, good.
That it is absolutely by Marcus Aurelius.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, as far as that's never been disputed.
Okay.
It's interesting though. You brought up something I was actually just writing about for another project, and that is classical frauds. That is later writers who wrote poetry and wanted it to be associated with Homer, for example, and claimed it was by Homer. Or I was looking at another example of the first historian, Herodotus. There's a pseudo Herodotus who claimed to have written a life of Homer, and it was we can tell from the style that it was written 700 years after the original Herodotus was dead.
Okay.
And it's really funny because, like a bad liar, pseudo Herodotus protests too much. This is the absolute truth that I'm going to tell you. There's no reason to doubt it. And you're like, immediately, you're like,
right.
Yes, BS. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the liar's tell.
Okay. Good. Yeah. Good to know. Because I wasn't sure, because for something to survive, 1900 and change years, is an accomplishment. It's a feat. Yeah. To have something like that, make it through history, without too much.
I would have been astounded that his private notebook, right, that I'm convinced he wrote it just for himself, is this huge phenom, right, all over America. One of the most popular self-help books.
Yeah.
Americans love self-help. That's the best-selling section in the bookstore, and poetry is the worst.
It should be the other way around, damn it.
I know. It's too cruel.
I guess we have to get over ourselves to appreciate things.
Yes. Yes. First, good. Also, yes, just to mention, since I've mentioned psychodrama, I should also mention cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay.
I have a therapist, and my therapist uses CBT, and that's basically what Marcus is using, an early form of cognitive behavioral theory that involves reframing situations in your lives. Marcus talks about extracting misjudgments or misassessments from himself. And that will eventually, this is the ideal. Can you imagine living this way? That would eventually, if you get rid of all of those, then you'd always only be doing just action. You'd be feeling happiness coming out of that, and you'd only be interested, yes, in doing justice and the present moment. And what the thing that gets me, you also wouldn't see anything bad that happens in your life as bad. Like, you could not get a job, a tornado could destroy your house. All of that is irrelevant, right? Those are matters of indifference. What matters are the virtues and acts of justice.
Right. Which, if you go, again, we're talking about East-West, you go to the East and you look at the Eightfold Path. It's teaching you the same damn thing, let it go, man. So, but I mean, they're different, but I just.
No. I've become more interested in Eastern religions as well, just because I've spent so much time in the West. I've been reading up on, classical Chinese poetry and Taoism.
Okay. Well, and I mentioned earlier that I do have an affinity for the synthesis that could occur, maybe perhaps along the Silk Road. And one of the people that really turned me on is, and I have a book of Pyrrhonian outlines in Pyrrhonianism by Sextus Empiricus, and he went with Alexander the Great to Hindu Kush and northern India and all that. And he met the Gymnosophists, and they really filled his head up. And he went back and opened up the Academy of the Skeptics, or the Pyrrhonians. Oh, I love that, because that's that sort of wedding of our Western heritage and canon and all that, blah blah blah, and what we could garner from the early proto-Buddhists like the Gymnosophist or the naked philosophers or whatever they were. But
so
anyway,
excited you know about Pyrrhonianism. That's awesome.
Yeah, I stumbled on it a few years ago. Like I said, I have one of the books which is really dense, and but I just epoche leads to ataraxia. I mean, come on, that's stoicism right there, right? Suspension of judgment will lead to a sense of well-being, right? So it's another type of stoicism for those that are aspirants to that kind of thinking. But I love, and then to go to modernity, another guy that I find interesting, don't go all the way with him, but is Sri Aurobindo, was a Hegelian. Sri Aurobindo was an modern Indian mystic. He was, his father was an Anglophile, sent him to Oxford, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Fell in love with Hegel, went back and became an Indian nationalist and told the Brits to get the hell out of India, like a lot of things that were happening in the first half of the 20th century. But he took the Hegelian dialectic and he took some inspiration from that and wedded it into Advaita Vedanta or whatever, and came up with this interesting synthesis, that was kind of fascinating, I don't understand it 100%, but it's just people like that who do these kind of East-West, again, synthesis always fascinates me.
Just, all those systems in general are just good to think with.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I've started reading my horoscope regularly. I hadn't done that for years, but I just like it as a system that allows me to think about my day. Yeah. Usually most of what's prophesied for me does not come true. But that's okay.
Right.
It gets me thinking about, how I want to make my way through my day. Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you think about what you put your attention on, not to get woo-woo, but, predictive processing, and again, I love cognitive science, don't have a really good grasp of it, but when they talk about active inference and predictive processing, that, you kind of frame the world, you're making bets on what the world is. You get your horoscope read, it gives you something to meditate on, it gives you something to focus on. And if it's not telling you, don't go out of the house today, if it's something nice, then you're going to open your lensing, your salience mapping or whatever. So I love it. Yeah. I mean, I joke about, my wife and I are both Libras. So, we love to have Libra arguments. It's like, no, dear, you have it. It's yours. No, I want to split it with you. No. There's a lot of fun to be had in that. Okay. If we could do, one more thing with meditations, and then I want to, for those who are here to hear you speak, talk about other things in your life that you're doing academically and with your writing and so forth. But I think I would like to address the idea, as you touched on a moment ago, with Stoicism being, like the flavor of the decade or quarter century or whatever. I follow a guy who talks about ecologies of practices, and you touched on that as well. Like, okay, Stoicism, great. But, what else can one do for themselves or with themselves to not just, put a laser convergent focus on Stoicism and and get bound up by that and have stickiness, that might just create a whole nother set of problems. Do you, in sage scholarly advice, do you think, a mindfulness practice, as you mentioned, or is there something that would complement Stoicism, in your opinion, that would build an ecology of practices so that you can learn the resilience that is wrought of Stoicism, but also maybe things that would complement that to help you develop a well-being for your life, or whatever whatever outcomes you're seeking?
Okay. I think, yes, I think I get it. There are practices Marcus himself proposes, his own practices.
Okay.
One of them I love is the test of instant divulgence. He says, what if suddenly you had to declare, right, for the rest of the day to someone right next to you everything that goes through your mind, right? Would what you say to that person be virtuous? Would it be embarrassing to you? Would it be hostile to others and nasty? And so he says, yes, there should be no, in a sense, distinction between what's in your mind and what's in your face and what's in your behavior. Another method he uses to promote Stoic behavior is the stripping method. He wants, as I mentioned, all material things are objects of indifference, right? Who cares? And so he says you use the stripping method to get over any good reputation some material object might have, like say a beautiful painting that's worth $2 million, right? And with the stripping method, you'd break it down into the oil paints and the canvas. You'd see the material it's made out of. And Marcus says that would, in you, would promote contempt for it in you, right? And I'm not sure I myself could embrace that practice, but I'm really interested in what it does, right? There's been a weird tension between being a poet and talking about Stoicism, right? Because I guess, I'm big on the beauty. Yes. Right. And also for poetry, I want some supercharged emotions that Marcus would find anathema, right? But I was wrong. I should say when I first read Meditations, and I had a prejudice against it that a lot of people have against Stoicism, that it's unemotional or even anti-emotional. You're supposed to, and that's what the word stoic means in a sense, austere or stoic, right? Okay. Right. But Marcus is, as I mentioned, is anything but passionless, right? And that he's a fervid believer in his Stoic philosophy religion. And that fervor came through and won me over. And so I realized it was just an ignorant prejudice on my part. I had not read my Meditations well the first time through.
Okay. And in the vein of us 21st century people reading something from the second century, I'll ask one question first. There was a woman being interviewed or having a conversation with somebody that I really admire, and something about mindfulness came up. And she was like, yeah, mindfulness, meditation. She goes, yeah, that's for men. That's something that we have to go from here to here, right? Calm the mind, bring ourselves down. So she was basically pointing out that it may not jam for men and women equally. And she's like, women are already some, there's obviously exceptions, but she's basically making a point that women are already kind of down here, and they're not that alpha, gregarious, extrovertive power person, and that they're in this other mental space or psycho-emotional space. And so I wonder, when we talk about someone like Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, and you and I, we're guys, and I have to bring my shit down sometimes, and not be so aggressive and not be so, like a dog distracted and all that. So to speak to women and persons of other gender, what would you intuitively, it could just be spontaneous, what would you intuitively say that Marcus Aurelius has? Would it be, would it be one of the characters, the aspirant, perhaps, that could open doors for a woman's access or a woman's appreciation of this?
It's interesting you bring that up. Marcus, on the whole, has very little to say to or for women. He rarely mentions them. Mm-hmm. He mentions his wife in a passing entry and gives her 3 adjectives. He mentions his mother and is a bit more affectionate with her. And then there are ugly stereotypes also that show up. I won't deny it. In that he'll say there's one he complains about. They're called, it's gynochondron. They're men, women, or women, men. He says men like women, and the implication is that, well, these men, homosexuals, are emotionally out of control, and that females are emotionally out of control. Good, and so that's there are some, but for the whole, on the whole he doesn't have much to say. Other Stoics are more open about equal rights in terms of philosophical access to Stoicism. But I don't want to run down Marcus and complain. And just he's just voicing the voice of his culture. But yes,
he's a man of his time, man of his place. Yeah, no, and that the question was in the spirit of because you and I have probably both known very powerful women, very strong women who have the kind of character and persona that would benefit from Stoicism. But I'm just thinking like that woman's comment about mindfulness, which seems so, mindfulness, it's, so uplifting and wonderful and it's transformative. But she made a good point. I mean, it's like, women might need to be mindful in Qigong or Tai Chi. They might need the embodied practice rather than so much, get the monkey mind to settle down and get in touch with your humanity or your feminine side or whatever, blah, blah, blah.
It's cool. Right? It's cool that Chiauten said that, though.
Yeah. I really appreciated it.
Females are more able to get into a meditative state than males. They can.
Yeah, men have to struggle.
They're already closer to it.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that Chiauten said that. Yes.
Yeah, no, it was one of those touchstone moments. It's like, okay, I get that. Yeah. Or I don't get it, but I get what, where you're going with that. And I appreciate that. So, but I also, I'm not throwing Marcus under the gender bus. It's more that, women there's no barrier to access if you are, of a particular, persona type or psychological, canoe, ocean scale type personality, that there should be something in there because there are some very tender moments with spirituality. You talked about the religious aspect of this. In fact, there's a quote I wouldn't mind reading in a moment that speaks to this kind of spiritual aspect of it. So it's not all about how to maintain, your integrity as a man or a powerful person. It's these moments of connection and accessing things that are beyond the normal mundane treachery of life. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because I've seen criticisms of Stoicism. It's like a bro thing, and it's too masculine and all that. And I'm like, well, it could be, but we're all different. Like there are men who are effeminate. There are men. I'm not a very masculine man, so it's like I don't think you know what I mean? It's like we're all different, so we all can find things, especially all the entries that are, 14 books and all the different entries. That there's something in there for a diverse group of people.
Modern Stoicism is heavy on the bros. But I do know I've heard of many female CEOs relying on the meditations as CEOs tend to do for some reason. Yes. And so I would hope, that the book would be not exclusive of females. That's another issue. I had to decide whether or not to use gender-neutral pronouns. In the supporting material, everything that wasn't the translation, I did, but I decided that I couldn't, though I wanted to, in the translation, because Marcus's pronouns are explicitly masculine, and because Roman culture is androcentric and chauvinistic, and I had to represent all of that.
Yeah.
But yes, that was another translation decision I had to make.
No, and I would support that because it is what is of that time. It is wrought from that position, that perspective, that stance, whatever you want to call it. And we in modernity or meta-modernity or wherever the hell we are sophisticated enough to do whatever kind of catalyst synthesis thing that we have to do to know that, we can embrace genders, we can embrace, expressions of masculinity and femininity and all these things, without having to sanitize that person or sanitize history. And other people would argue with that, and that's fine. I'm not trying to argue against their position. It's more that I agree with you that it needs to stay historically sound, and then we can see it for what it is. It's just like if we sanitize racial issues from the early part of the 20th century, and clean up some things. It's like, no, let that stain be there. Let the badness be there as a teacher, as a heuristic. That's my opinion. Maybe we don't want to tread into those waters, but it's like Ted Turner years ago took a Tom and Jerry cartoon as a good example. I get his intention. He took a Tom and Jerry cartoon with a black maid, and all you saw was her legs and the hem of her skirt, and she was speaking plantation African American vernacular to Tom. And it was offensive, and it was what they did in the 40s or the 50s. They were very insensitive to racial issues. But Ted Turner came along and put a very white Anglo-American voice to it and overdubbed it. And instead of saying, Thomas, you best to get OWT to house, and I'm apologies to anybody who's offended. And then Thomas, you need to leave the house now. I'm like, why did you do that? We need to know how racist people were. Sorry for the soapbox, but it's just like that speaks to what I think could support, your decision. Is that's how it was, and salient.
No, I understand. Yes,
we have to be aware of how people, of how history unfolded. So anyway, enough of that because I don't want to turn this into a a critique of anyone's any misfeasances of the past. So or malfeasances. Now, if you would indulge me, I'd like to pull up something from, I think it was, let me just look. If you'll just, I know this is bad interview here, but okay. All right. I'm going to go to, I'm in, let's see, book 4, and I'm going to go to, where the heck is, okay, coming up. All right. 40, book view, or book 4. It says, always think of the universe as an all-embracing living being, one substance and one soul, and notice how all things reach towards the vantage point of that all-embracing living being. So all things move as one, and how things work together as causes, and how they make up a well-knit, intricate tapestry. I thought that was a beautiful statement. As somebody who likes Neoplatonism and a little bit of Aristotle.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I don't want to talk about my translation, but in the Greek, it's a beautiful passage.
Okay.
He's talking about nature there with a capital N, and it's amazing. It's a perfect system according to Marcus, and he says the assumption is there's nothing outside of it. So it doesn't need any material to be contributed to it. And it also, since there's no outside of it, it can't throw trash out. And so it recycles it through decay into new things forever and forever and forever. Good. The Stoics also most of them assume that the universe is periodically consumed by fire and starts again, but Marcus just entertains that as a possibility. But yes, I just love, and that it's this perfect system. It doesn't do harm to anyone or anything. And it's as I said, the Gestalt. It's more than all that makes it up. Marcus does not, fully personify it in a human figure like a Greek god. But he does address prayers to it. And that passage you just read had some aspects of prayer to it as well. And that everything moving in accordance with the vantage point of nature, right? As it's running everything. Yeah, I love that entry.
No, it really spoke to me. And again, I do like Neoplatonism, and he does bring up the logos. In fact, the other quote that I was going to read, which was a few segments back, was talking about the executive logos and another iteration or aspect or stance of the logos. And I'd never heard it spoken to or for in that way. So, I mean, I could even read it for the audience. It's not that far behind from the one I just read. In fact,
great.
Let's see. Let's go to 80. I wasn't going to read it because I wanted to, but I think it's really neat. Do only what the imperial and legislative logos in you ordains for the benefit of humankind. And then I skipped a little bit and I went down and it says, when your mind is doing proper work, there is nothing more you could ask for. Yeah. So imperial and legislative logos.
Yes.
I like that because that's kind of what we do with the mind. You know, there's aspect of mindedness. And I'm with the ancient Greeks. I think the spirit, the soul, the logos, well, the logos is the logos, but like the nous is like the psyche, you know, it is the spirit. Yeah. Right. So anyway, so that speaks to me.
Oh, very well. Yes. No, I love that entry as well.
Cool. I like that we like that. It's just, you know, I mean, it speaks to the spiritual nature. It takes a step away from the mundane and really gets you to open up your mind and think about interconnectedness, interdependence.
He does the sub, and so there's the capitalized figures, the cosmic powers that I ended up capitalizing were logos when it refers to the universal concept, nature, and then providence also got all caps. But then Marcus will, and Stoics do this elsewhere, subdivide, and so there's capital N nature. And then there are the individual natures, and there's capital L logos, and then there are the aspects of logos, like the imperial logos that you mentioned, that Marcus uses to do certain things. That entry is interesting also because it's one of the few in which Marcus reveals that he talks about being the emperor, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's both at the same time, telling him what to do and also being in charge. And he said, yes, you're like other people, and you should always remember that. But also you should remember you are you are meant to preside over them as the ram lords it over his flock. Yes. And so he rarely talks about being emperor. And that's another thing I really love about him. Modesty and humility recur in his lists of virtues, and he seemed to have really lived it. He was reluctant to be emperor in the first place. He got drafted into it. He wanted to be a full-time philosopher, and he was scrupulously dutiful throughout his life, right? He was willing to make personal sacrifices for his duties, like a good Stoic should. And so, yes, I ended up admiring him a great deal. Yes.
Cool. Yeah, no, I mean, given the power that he, wielded, and then the depth, and maybe I'm unfairly comparing him to, again, whatever version of modernity we're in and whatever's passing for political leadership around the world. I'm not indicting anyone in particular, but, it's just where we find ourselves. And so to have someone who is a benign, or not sort of a beneficent, if that's the right word, kind of leader. Yeah. Okay. We've got about 50 minutes into this conversation, and we had talked about trying to, if we felt like we were going good at the hour mark, but I want to open up some ideas and some exploration about your work beyond meditations. So maybe we could spend 15, 20 minutes on that. And call it a good hour and 15-minute interview.
Yes,
You're good.
I hope I have enough material, but yes.
Oh, I think, yeah. Well, we both are not shy, wallflowers, and inhibited, so I think we'll come up with some dialogue. But yes, the reason I want to do that is you're an accomplished writer. You have a dozen books published at least?
I think so. It depends on how you count the translations, but yes, around there. Yeah.
And some of them are period. Like our period, and you had written, was it 4 Walks in Central Park was one of the themes?
Yes, that came out in the fall of 2025. Mm-hmm. And that was also something that came out of my unfortunate experiences during COVID. I was a drug addict during COVID for a year and a half. I was a cocaine addict.
You're in good
company. So when I was coming out of it, I was looking for new reasons to get out of the house and new forms of meditation to calm my mind. And I came across a form of meditation called Shinrin Yoku in Japanese. It's just forest bathing, right?
Okay, yeah.
But it's basically mindfulness in the forest, but with even more intentionality. And I started practicing it, and it was hard because I was terribly addicted to what I was addicted to. And so it was hard for me to leave my apartment for long because I couldn't do my drugs. But I did longer and longer walks in the park because that's pretty much all you could do still in the aftershock of COVID. And so eventually I started taking notes and journaling, and then I realized, oh my God, I could make a didactic poem. It's rare nowadays, but I'm trying to revive it. In ancient Greek and Latin literature, there are examples of didactic epics that teach you things, like Hesiod's Theogony teaches you all the gods, right? Aratus's Phenomena teaches you all the constellations. There's even Nicander, who teaches you all about snakes. Didactic poetry. And then Virgil has his Georgics that teach you to farm. And it's a form of mode of poetry that's been not very popular since the 18th century in England with Alexander Pope. And I loved it when I was in graduate school, reading these didactic epics. And so I decided I would try to write one. The word didactic, I know it has unfortunate connotations, but didactic is fun and lively, right?
Yes,
it's entertainment and poetry. That's what I tried to do with 4 walks in Central Park. In the past, I've also done some writing for the stage, and I'm starting to do that again. That was one of my most pleasant experiences. I translated Euripides' Bacchae, and a legendary theater company in New York, City Company, decided to do it. And yes, it was produced at the Getty in LA and at BAM here and in the Guthrie, Minneapolis. And writing for the stage, hearing words that have come out of your pen spoken by other people, is a really weird feeling, but it's a great feeling. And working with the actors was really great in that they were the best critics of my translation, and that they were always worried about the right motivation for their character, right? They'd say, why would my character say that when I gave him a line? I was like, oh, maybe you're right. And then I'd look at the Greek again and look at my English again. And they were really great to work with. So those are, some of the happiest projects of my career.
Okay. Now this prompts a question. You're translating into Greek from Latin, presumably with the meditations, but also Greek to English. Are in the process of translation, is it incumbent upon one to have a fine grain apprehension of Greek, or can one do it a la like the Mary's Room or the Chinese Room, Searle's Chinese Room, where you're just passing characters along, but you understand the characters, but you don't have to be fluent in a language to do translating? And that may be a horrible question, but I'm curious, like what depth of apprehension do you have to have of a foreign language to accurately translate it?
I just want to say there are different kinds of translation and different purposes for translation, right? If you're going to publish a translation with a major trade press that's going to be used in college classes, right? Then yes, you should have a mastery of the language. But if one is translating and I've done this, and I'm fascinated with languages. I've been looking at more Eastern languages and playing around with them, classical Chinese. I do those merely to creatively explore what I can do with words. And so I fiddle around and I do translations of poems from languages I don't know. I have to look up every character or every word in order to fit it together. But I find those experiences fascinating. And so I guess my point is I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from playing around with translation. But if your translation's intended for undergraduate students, for example, then there's a different standard, and and you have completely different concerns as well. But yes, I've been doing more and more playing around, with languages I barely know or don't know at all, just because it's fun and stimulates me.
Oh yeah. Oh, good for the mind. There is something you can modernity. You can find it online, and someone I think in Australia or New Zealand was a Scrabble player. they learned every word, I believe, in the French dictionary, and they memorized all of the words, but they are not good at contiguity of syntax of language. Maybe they learned infinitive conjugation, blah blah blah, but they had every word committed to memory so that they could play Scrabble, right? Which is again like the Chinese room experiment. Like, you know the characters, you know how to move them, and blah blah blah. But I thought that was so fascinating, and it would be interesting to know, if it, intuitively there's some means of fluency when one knows all the words, but maybe not the mechanics of the structuring of the language. So anyway, but fascinating.
And the Greek and Greek and Latin poetry are especially fascinating in that respect, in that we have a fixed syntax for English, right? Mm-hmm. We go subject, verb, object, right? Okay. I picked up the cat, right? Mm-hmm. Subject, verb, object. In Latin and Greek, because they're highly inflected languages, syntax becomes less important because the endings tell you which words go together and how the meaning fits together. Okay. And so in Latin and Greek, there's a famous book written about it called plexed artistry, in which it comes down to the balancing of words that agree with each other. Adjective, noun, verb in the middle, or whatever you can do. So there are all these elegant, really elegant, and complicated arrangements of words in Greek and Latin. It's impossible to translate. I mean, you could try, but it would be gobbledygook in English because we'd have the wrong adjective with the wrong noun. And so there are some rhetorical emphases you can get across from Greek to English, from Greek rhetoric to English. But the poetry, my God, to get that plexed artistry across into English, I wish I could do that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, I love language too. I mean, I'm a poor student, but I do appreciate language, and I'm maybe intermediate Spanish, and I work with a lot of Spanish speakers. So I do horrible sentence structures for them, and I help them because they are, most of them are good English speakers and some of them are learning. And so I try to help them with structure and they help me with structure. So we kind of help each other, we support each other in our foibles and things. It's fun though. I love, language is great. If I had a better, absorption capacity, I would love to pick up Japanese and French. I think those would be the other two, because Spanish I love. And like I said, I can read Spanish, I can sort of speak it, and I can sort of understand it with some competency. But boy, if I could just, snap my fingers and learn Japanese, I would, both formal and informal. And then French is such a beautiful language. I would love to be able to speak French with people, but even just hearing it is good enough for me. Yeah. So let me ask you a humdinger of a question that we could maybe send ourselves out. You mentioned something earlier about poetry versus stoicism, right? And we're, 2026 when we're recording. How do you make poetry viral or trendy, or how could you imagine poetry having its a renaissance or a fatty injection into the younger culture, other than rap, which is great, I mean that's rhyming and so forth, but I mean sort of more structured poetry, or what younger people might find boring. I mean, do you see an inroad to the popular culture? What might vector it in the future?
I mean, if I had to place blame for poetry's obscurity in 2026, I would place it more on the poets, right? In that, I don't want to rant now, but poetry, the creative writing is mostly now in institutions, in colleges, and they're hermetic. They're sealed off. The writers who are publishing books of poetry, they don't have any obligation to sell copies in order to get whatever tenure or whatever. And so it ends up being a hermetic community of poets writing for poets who are in the know. Everybody's in the know. Right. And so what I've tried to do with my career is the exact opposite, right? I want to reach out and connect with the reader. I'll do anything to do it. I assume the reader's always just looking for the least excuse to put your book down and never look at it again. And you can never give the reader that opportunity, right? You got to keep, yes. And so, yes, I mean, one way to think about it is that poetry, as I see it, should always be an entertainment, even if it's serious, even if it's about the worst things that can happen in humankind. There's always an element of play, of linguistic excitement, right? Yes, of this, playful give and take. And so, yes, that is something I hope then we can, get out to readers. I'm going to start reading, actually. I live near Tompkins Square Park in the East Village of New York City, and there are lots of buskers around. I'm going to start busking and reading poetry in the park, I think, later this week. Nice. I love reading poetry, and I don't get to do it as much as I like. And so we'll see how that goes. I'm curious to see how people respond.
Oh, I would love follow up on that. I'll have to check in with you in a couple months and see where you are with that. If you're gathering crowds other than,
or if I've gotten beaten up,
or things thrown at you, Yes. No, I think there would be a warm reception, and I don't want to write off. I'm old, so I can talk about the young people, but and I'll take back what I said about rhyming in rap. No, the lyricism in music. There's a lot of very thoughtful adjacency to pure poetry in music and things like that. So I'll correct myself on that. But anyway, that would be neat. That would be neat. And I also wonder, in the age of, and I'm extremely hyperactive, ADHD, whatever, that mixed media could incorporate poetry or verse, and so you could have a it'd be crass and say video, but something, visual art, something.
There have been collaborations, and I've had some trailers made for my books. That were fun. I worked with a filmmaker. There have been, but you're right. There should be more, right? Like there used to be MTV. There should be poetry TV.
Yeah. I just think it's a challenge for various media artists, and I'm thinking more digital than anything, because we have the TikTok and Instagram and Reels and things like that. And not that I'd want to shrink it down to 30 seconds, but maybe you start there. But to whet the appetites and to instead of mimetic, it's mimetic. It's the miming.
Got it.
The meme and the mime working in conjunction with each other, right? Because that seems to be what the capture is now. It is the meme, in action, and then the mime is virality. So anyway. Here's to that. Here's to all of that. Here's to poetry, because I think we talk about an ecology of practices. If one has a love for lyricism or poetry and sees the beauty in it, that is therapeutic, and that is both grounding and transcendent, enabling or facilitating, that your mind can open up and as you said, get out in the park and forest walk, because we all have our drug of choice, and sometimes it is TikTok. You're sitting there with your device. I think that's far more powerful than a lot of the chemical things that we can do, and God knows I did a lot of that. But so anyway, let's do this. Is there anything that you would like to bring out that we didn't maybe talk about, or do you think we're at a good point? Any final thoughts, summative statements?
I'll leave the audience with an inspiring message from Marcus Aurelius.
There you go.
That your happiness is entirely in your own control. It doesn't depend on what anybody else does or anything else that happens to you. Your happiness is entirely up to you and your assessments of the world. That's Marcus Aurelius's big takeaway message.
Okay. I think that's a great way to leave it, and a great place to stop for now. And what I'll say is that if this was a good conversation experience for you in the future, if you have other projects that are that come on board and become actualized, then feel free to reach out to me, and we'll bring you back, and we'll talk about anything else that you're working on in the future. You could report back from Tompkins Park and let us know what was thrown at you, and
Important life.
who applauded you, and who tried to steal your poetry book, and
Yes.
maybe for a good reason. Maybe they wanted to go read it themselves or something. But
Or
anyway,
I'll be mugged. Yes.
well, if they take the book, that's great, right? Yeah, go get another copy, and they'll open their minds a little bit and be like, "Wow, I'm glad I stole this book," right? Anyway. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your thoughts and your mind and everything that you've brought to this conversation. I'll say goodbye to you after we stop record. But to the YouTube and Spotify audience, thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed having Aaron here as a guest. So I'll speak to you all, or I'll hear from you all in the comments, or I'll see you in the next video. But yeah, like I said, you and I will say goodbye after this. Let me stop recording here.